Yeah, hi everybody. So we're going to cover a number of different topics, but I want to start with this formula for e-commerce success because it really drives the way that both of our teams think about how we can drive revenue for e-commerce websites. So revenue equals traffic times conversion rate times average order value. And as we're looking at improving the revenue on your website, what we look to is how can we drive more traffic? How can we increase the number of people that are purchasing from your website? Or how can we increase the average order value of what people are purchasing on your website? So a lot of the tips that we're going to get to in the latter half of the presentation are going to be focused around improving one of these numbers so that we can improve the revenue overall. Wanted to set this out there sort of as a foundation for what we're going to talk about today and how to improve e-commerce. We're going to start, though, at a higher level because I think at a time of change, it's really particularly helpful to look at what is happening with consumer behavior and e-commerce to help us understand at a broader perspective where we're sitting, which sets us up for how to react. So consumers are definitely shifting towards e-commerce. We'll start with this, this curve graph. We've all gotten really good at looking at and analyzing curve graphs, and there is a curve in our industry. So the number of searches that Google saw happening for ordering food online really increased a lot in the end of March, but it's peaked off and it's starting to level off. So if you'll forgive the pun, the curve is starting to flatten. And it's really time to look and prepare for what's going to be happening next. 89% of Americans expect to adjust their routines due to COVID-19, and 56% of them expect to do so for more than 4 months. So consumers are really hunkering down into some new behavior, new routines. Let's talk about what some of those are. There are definitely some categories where consumers are expecting to spend more than 50% additional to what they had been spending pre-COVID. And groceries and snacks are at the forefront here. In the food industry, we're seeing declines, of course, in restaurant, expected expenditures in restaurant, and even in quick service and takeout. But we're seeing big increases in expectations for grocery and snacks. We're seeing that's accompanied by some new behaviors. People are not going out to eat as much as they had been. They are ordering more food delivery and takeout, and they are buying items online but not going in store. So 37% of people are buying items online and not going in store. And we're seeing that in particular with e-commerce. E-commerce purchases are up a huge amount. This is year-over-year e-commerce orders in the household purchases category. So this includes food and beverage as well as some other categories. And we're seeing that that is peaking as high as almost 175% over last year. There's an enormous increase in e-commerce orders across categories, and that's reflected in all of the e-commerce, most of the e-commerce customers that we deal with, both in the food industry and outside. We're seeing numbers that are sometimes eclipsing holiday numbers that are higher than Black Friday numbers in the past 6 weeks. That data is borne out nationally in some specific food categories really spiking. So soups, rice and greens, and packaged foods are all seeing year-over-year increases of more than 300%, and that's just in e-commerce sales. So some really interesting opportunities for natural food categories. We are also seeing some changes in consumer values. So an increase in people, of course, who are expecting to spend time cooking at home, doing home improvement, but also exercising and meditation and mindfulness. And so we're starting to wonder if those behaviors around healthy living aren't helping consumers become more in line with some of the same values that natural foods companies are espousing. There is an opportunity to find new audience during this time frame. So in fact, 65% of consumers have tried new brands after sheltering in place became commonplace. And a lot of them did that because their regular brand was out of stock. But the thing that I think is really interesting and promising for challenger brands is that 25 to 30% of people who tried a new private label brand will stick with it going forward. So you may, in fact, have some new customers as a result of this, new audiences that are going to stick with you through the next challenging 4 months, but then potentially beyond that as well. So given that sort of consumer environment, how our behavior is changing, how our attitudes are changing, how can e-commerce companies adapt? I wanted to start by thinking about consumers. What is driving consumer behavior and consumer needs here? And this is often something that we do as marketers. We like to think about what is happening with the consumer, how are they thinking about things, so that we can help understand how we might address their needs. What Nielsen has advised is that there are 5 key motivations that are behind COVID-driven buying. So people are purchasing proactive, health-minded buying, purchasing preventative health and wellness products. They're doing reactive health management by purchasing protective gear and things like that. They're doing pantry preparation. They're doing quarantine preparation. So how do I make sure I have enough stock to handle store shortages and be doing fewer store visits, and also for restricted living. So if I'm doing fewer shopping visits and if online fulfillment in some of the big merchandisers is limited, how can I adapt my purchasing behavior? So the reason I think that this is an interesting foundation and place to start is that as you look at the increase in e-commerce buying that hopefully is happening on your website, as well as the ones that we're seeing, thinking about what is different about how those consumers are showing up on your website and what they're looking for and what they need as a result. How does your product fulfill those needs, or how might you need to change and evolve your product or the way that you offer those products for sale in order to satisfy these new needs? One of the things that we definitely recommend is that you are communicating. You need to be communicating in order to maintain the brand awareness and the loyalty that you've built up to date. There have been several studies asking consumers if they think brands should continue advertising during this time, and the evidence is overwhelming that you should. Some surveys say, one survey said 66% that Twitter did, another survey said 92%, but consumers really think that you should continue advertising. There's no need to not be advertising. And in fact, 43% find it reassuring to hear from the brands that they know and trust. Now, of course, you do want to adjust the messaging these days. You're not going to be having the same messages. And really, it makes sense to try and strengthen the emotional connections you have with your brand supporters right now. One of the things that consumers are really interested in hearing about in the brands that they trust is, how are you keeping staff safe? How are you keeping customers safe? And how are you supporting society right now? So if you're able to talk about some of those things, you'll resonate with where consumers are right now and help retain that emotional connection that made them engaged with your brand in the first place. And I'll hand it over to Chelsea.
Awesome. Hi, guys. That was great, Chris. So a couple of back things as we're going to talk about how to evolve. And so we want to go through kind of the next components. And Maggie, was I supposed to be sharing on this, or are you still moving us through? I just realized. Okay, cool. So how to evolve. We are, as Chris said, specialize in Shopify development, e-commerce development specifically. But for today's talk, I'm going to talk specifically on Shopify and the back-end components that are available. Many of you are probably on Shopify or on something similar, but there are some subscription components that are available on multiple platforms. So one of the things we have seen in COVID that has happened and skyrocketed has been the subscription growth component. This has happened with a number of our clients, including ones like Vital Proteins, and making sure that those like with Bobo's, Oat Bars, and couple of companies that are really making this piece available for customers. So why is subscription growing so much, and why is it kind of this thing that's not going to go away? So a couple of stats here. As you probably we've probably all done it, where we've bought something and we actually got into a subscription and didn't realize it. That is becoming the new norm. The biggest curated boxes have been coffee and tea that are ongoing subscription models, and then health foods and subscriptions regarding if you're going to have replenishment of something, if it's something you take every day. Obviously, health and wellness is a big component of this. Also, pet foods. This is a really important component for those that are on pets. We probably all know the stories of Chewy.com and how they got started and specializing in that niche. So our encouragement is, if you don't have subscription on your e-commerce site now, to put it in place. Now there are a couple of options for that. And one that we recommend is recharge specifically. But I think we're talking about that in some of our later slides here. So recharge is one that is easy to deploy. If you're on Shopify, you can just install the app and have a subscription component to it. You might need some development on customizing your product description page. But why this is important is that in 2019, the total market share of retail sales that happen online surpassed those that happen in store for the first time ever. And obviously with 2020, we're just seeing that increase, as we talked about earlier. So what's really important in subscription boxes and why they aren't going away is that they have a popularity of e-commerce. They increase your social media use and a growing consumer comfort regarding paying value over time. Now, what has gone away, as you guys might even think of in your own buying options, are the ones that don't have options to change, pause, or adapt. So think bigger companies like Dollar Shave Club and companies that are doing really well with subscription. They have the ability for consumers to adjust the back end. So that's really important when you're thinking of adding a subscription component, is let it be adaptable. So if you have a tea or coffee company, allow them to select different teas or different coffees into your box. Don't keep it the same all the time. Because people get bored with those boxes and have a higher chance of churn rate than they do on the ones that are subscription only for brands that allow for flexibility. Hopefully that kind of makes sense if you think about how you probably are buying stuff now in COVID and what that's looking like. So more than half of the customers choose monthly subscriptions. This has increased massively with COVID. So this is really a key factor to keep in mind when you're selling direct to consumer with your website and how to add this as a component. I thought this was really interesting too, in that more than a third of customers are more likely to choose a custom plan length that falls outside of the typical monthly, quarterly, or semi-annual subscription options. So this is really a statistic that ties back into what I said earlier of making your subscription component customizable. There are a number of platforms that can do that. For today's example and Recharge specifically, they have two factors of that, Recharge and Recharge Pro. But I think this is just fun to think about when you think of your own shopping. If you have something that allows you more flexibility or to change it, why not do that? A good component in the health and wellness world, since all the gyms are closed, has been that company that built ClassPass. They built that out of a need that allowed for people to take classes at different gyms all across the country. So, and that's just another fancy example of subscriptions that are working. So a couple of things that we like to focus on. Rachel and I's area of focus in the natural food space is in food and beverage. So most of our verticals are in this space, and Right now, this is the highest average order value in food and beverage. It's just like Chris said earlier, the statistics in COVID are very specific to food, pantry stocking, a lot of the concepts of living at home and new, trying to cook more at home, things like that. But one thing that is really interesting is also that the entertainment vertical offers box plans for a vertical that tend to be highly discretionary. It's like a perfect vehicle for both merchant and the customer. However, food subscription providers had the third highest average order value, or AOV, whether merchants are focusing on creating pre-planned meals or making it easier for customers that they never run out. This is really important with the spike in trends of food sales that are specific for allergies. So gluten-free, keto, all the different components, whether they're allergic to nuts or dairy or any of those, you can now search and sort accordingly. For those of you in the natural food space that know and have a presence maybe on Thrive Market, this is how they grew and scaled with that kind of a platform in mind. And a couple of thoughts on the average order value by vertical. So this is the latest statistics on subscription model. So beverages are growing the highest as far as subscriptions that are doing, specifically coffee companies, tea companies, but coffee subscription brands, and you guys can probably think of a handful of them, have been doubling their growth as average order value. The next is entertainment and then food. So you can see how high this is in their average order value being significantly, closer to like the $70 mark or the $55, $60 mark. If you think of that in terms of scaling to grow, you can think of, okay, if you have this many numbers of traffic to your site and your average order value is $55, then how do you get that to scale and be profitable? And our ideas with the AOV is that this is just going to grow more after COVID. So one question that we get a lot when it comes to subscription challenges, let's say, is how to help the churn rate. So the churn rate, as in people that cancel the subscription or, just cancel or have a credit card malfunction or something like that. So this can be improved much better in a couple of ways. One is educated customers, making sure that you don't have what is known as the leaky bucket effect of where the cost to acquire a new customer becomes unmanageable and costs you more money in the long term. So a high churn rate doesn't need to be accepted as face value. Rather, it can be used as a tool to improve the way you educate your customers. So this is where that customization standpoint comes into place. So no matter how thorough a merchant is, there will still be a customer that will choose to cancel subscriptions. But what we have seen in our experience that has helped are those that are customizing them or re-engaging their market more or offering ways to change it, pause it, skip it, or send it to your neighbor or your grandma. That's a really important factor when it comes to subscription. For example, if I have a cat and I know my neighbor has a cat and I'm ordering their pet food and one day I get too much and I can ship it to a different address, that's important for lowering your churn rate because you're giving them more examples of how to not just cancel. A couple of things that are interesting about your churn vertical. So the reason food, I think, is at the highest percentage with entertainment as churn, and I have a few philosophies on it. These are the latest stats where you've got food, entertainment, pets, and home of subscription models that people cancel, is honestly because the food industry is slow to the market when it comes to direct to consumer and subscription boxes. And because of that, there has been this higher churn. Most companies we have worked with have just put in a standard subscription with the same thing every time. People get bored when it's the same every time. So you have to have that ability to adjust it so that this can ideally go down. But as you can see at the very bottom here, coffee has the lowest churn rate. It's a habit forming product. People want their coffee daily. It's easy to get that consistency. So regardless of what vertical you're in, what's really important is to know the numbers. So even if we went on the high numbers of food here at being, let's say 15% churn rate, that's still really good considering the average order value is higher and your overall consumer database is going to be longer, because your lifetime value in a subscription is usually 2.5 times more than it would be if they had just a one-off order. So a couple of things that we like to talk about is setting up e-commerce for success. How to do that, how to fix your tech stack, what that's looking like.
Great. Well, so this is pretty exciting. Thank you, Chelsea, for sharing all of the, subscription is something that's really interesting to think about. And what I love to consider and what we're kind of have as a theme here is thinking about all of the ways that you can leverage your most qualified traffic, get them to order and order frequently and increase their order and have a better conversion rate. So all of these things do necessarily work together. And so in order for us to set up e-commerce for success in light of how can you leverage your existing product catalog, your business model, and integrate subscription into this to be successful in times that we're living in right now, I like to look at it in a couple of different ways. So we have subscription, and we want to look at how we can bundle products. We want to look at shipping opportunities, some of our direct-to-consumer best practices, some ideas on promos, but really ways to increase AOV. And so that's what we're going to be covering here for the next few slides. So I found this graph to be very interesting. So I was reflecting a couple days ago. I was working on a blog post and I was thinking about all of the different subscriptions that I currently have. And it's one of those things when you start to think, oh, I have 4, maybe 5. And then you start thinking about other things and I'm like, decided, well, I have, my Adobe platform on subscription. I have 4 streaming services on subscription, not only the physical products and the digital products. So this graph shows the increase in divergence between a subscription-based economy and the versus the regular retail-based economy. And this graph starts off early, I think 2014. I was thinking and reflecting the other day about when I first started with Netflix and when I cut the cord. And that was in the 2009, 2010. And so we've seen this little pieces of this become interwoven throughout our lives from the beginnings of online streaming versus Amazon. And now we're in a place where subscription truly is king. And I think any business in e-commerce can leverage this in a way where you can match up to the subscription growth curve and be able to, differentiate yourself on that perspective. You can go next slide. So looking at your product catalog, I think that anybody on this call today can think about some actionable ways that they can look at what they have today and figure out how can I turn this into subscription. So first we can look at things by product. Do you have products that you could bundle together to create a variety pack or a sampler pack or some way that you can create options? The first thing that comes to my mind is, do you have multiple flavors of a similar type of product? Do you have a handful of different, plant-based creamers or a handful of different flavors of candy that you sell individually, but together you can make a sampler pack? One of those things is a great way to leverage subscription because the customer can get something new every month, or it could be a variety of every month and not committing to buying one product in bulk. Another way to look at your product catalog is think about bundling by collection. So not the same product, but products that are complementary of one another. So for example, if you have a coffee company, but you also sell tea, and then maybe you sell some creamer, you can bundle coffee, tea, and creamer together into a monthly subscription box. And think about how if you have multiple flavors, you can make that different every month for your consumer. And the one thing that Chelsea was talking about earlier is churn rate. And we see traditionally in this market at month 3 about a 50% churn rate, drop-off rate in food and beverage. And so you want to think about, how can you get past month 3? What can I do to hit month 4 and possibly month 5 with repeat purchasers? And providing variety in differences, surprise and delight in the inbox is what I love to say. You can think about any ways to mix and match your collections. And another opportunity is the buy one, get one option. So whether you combine 2 products that could be the same or very different, you can buy one and get the second product free or at half price. This allows for, in a subscription model, to, again, create differences, variety. And a lot of times we're dealing with clients who are on multiple digital e-com platforms, not just necessarily Shopify, but you're competing with yourself on Amazon. So how do you make your direct-to-consumer site different and unique? And so subscription and unique bundling options is one way that you can think today, what I can implement tomorrow. A couple of best practices I love to speak about when it comes to subscription. First and foremost, talks about the customer experience. It's not just I'm going to put subscription on my website and I'm going to forget about it. It's about what is the customer journey, and that experience is going to really have them coming back over and over again. Whether it's the aesthetic of the products and the presentation, whether it is that joy that they get when they get your box in the mail every month, or whether it's on the website when you're able to give them options that allows them to change, swap, get what they want. It's all about convenience. And this is one best practice to always be thinking about. What is my customer's journey and what do I really want them to do? So that being the first one. And then the second one is focused on not just looking for one-time buyers, but looking to acquire subscribers. And we're seeing the trends across the board right now that subscription first shopping is becoming so accepted, especially when you have the option to opt out of it. But you want to look for customers and acquire the customers that will stick around. That's going to, you pay for the upfront to get them in as customers, and how do you keep them going? So you want to look for people who want to explore your product base, try new things, and subscription's a great platform for that. Some ideas on promotions, and we're really not going to dive deep into this. We have a little bit about email marketing coming up, but as you look at the types of promotions that you can run today in your e-commerce business that can either elevate subscriptions or elevate just overall growth in online shopping for a natural food space, email marketing is a major component. Looking at your social media marketing, what are you doing to promote this on social? What are your most recent Facebook, Instagram posts? Do they relate to introducing the idea of online shopping to your customers, especially if you transition from brick and mortar and have now added this element to your model for business? There's additional items here. I won't go through all of them, but the ones that really stick out to me, providing great customer service. I've always believed that you can have the best product on the face of this planet, but if your customer service is not reflective of the same greatness, you'll never keep a customer. So make sure that's top, especially in times where people are looking for comfort, there's confusion, frustrations. Customer service is so incredibly important. Look for ways to incentivize your customers with rewards or discounts or types of referral programs. A lot more. We have Q&A session at the end of this. You can ask more questions around this area. You can move ahead. And then ways to increase your AOV, or your average order value. So there are some benchmarks across the board, a great average order value. We saw on the chart earlier, food and beverage upwards of $70. That's great. The reality is that most F&B sits between a 45 to 60 average order value. So how do you increase that? Well, you increase it by giving them options to buy something else additional, add on. So toss this one in. As you're checking out and you have your repeat purchase, give them the option to toss this extra thing in for 10 more bucks. $8 more. It's complimentary. They love your product, but it increases the average order value. And if you can do that consistently across the board on all of your orders, you'll see a lift ongoing. And that's really, how you can look at that and think, how can I upsell and just increase that AOV? Customer loyalty, the more they come back, the more they purchase. That frequency is in your favor. How can you incentivize those frequent purchasers? Of course, you want to make sure that you make the most of all the seasons, this is really key. And I know that we're going through some bullet points that kind of seem like popcorn, but these to us are some best practices. You have got to have a mobile-friendly first working website. And if you're not able to shop easily 3 clicks to cart on your mobile site, then you need to do a little bit of refining. So a takeaway from today, look at your mobile site experience. Is it something that you can optimize? And then of course, just showcase your top selling items. Make sure that people know that it's urgent for them to participate, to purchase, to check out, take advantage of offers, things like that. You can move ahead. Yep, and just some great graphs here. Just looking at some KPIs, add to cart rates. I know that all of you, if you have e-commerce websites, know there's a drastic difference between add to cart and checkout. So, we're just making sure that you see the add to cart rate for repeat purchasers obviously is significantly higher. First graph on the left-hand side, 23% add to cart rate, almost 8.5% conversion rate. And then, you see those numbers stagger down. So just another reinforcement as why it's so critical to foster and cultivate relationships with repeat purchasers. Okay, great. I'll hand it back.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. So, I'm going to talk about mining your data. So how you can leverage the data that you have on your own e-commerce site to answer some questions about your business and help improve e-commerce. As we go through the rest of the presentation today, we have categorized the tips that we're making here in 3 ways. First, to say, is this a baseline recommendation? So these are things that we really think, like Rachel said, you've got to have a mobile optimized site. That's a baseline of being in business these days. So make sure that you've checked off those boxes. And then we have tips that are more growth oriented. So if you've got the basics covered and you're really looking to expand on your e-commerce sales, these are tactics that are going to help you get there. And lastly, we've included a few tips that are quick so that if you just have a couple hours, you have an afternoon to focus in a new way on marketing. These are some of the things that you can take a look at to do. So I like to remind e-commerce providers who have multiple channels of sales, whether you've got a store or you're selling on Amazon and Walmart or other places, that one of the key advantages of doing e-commerce on your own website is that you have access to all the data that's inside of there. Google Analytics will answer questions about who's coming from where, what ages and genders they are, information that you're not going to get about your browsers and your purchasers from other platforms. So that said, there's a ton of information inside of Google Analytics, and we always like to advise people before you get your head stuck into all that data and go down some rabbit hole, which is what I find myself doing sometimes, is to actually start with a question. So here are a few questions that you can ask that will help your business that Google Analytics can help you answer. First, where are my customers physically? For each of these slides, on the lower part of the slide is the navigation. Once you get into Google Analytics, how do I get to this report? For the where are my customers report, you're going to navigate to the audience section, to the geo menu, to location, and to city. And you'll see a report like this. It is common to see cities here that are big in population, right? It's not a surprise to me to see New York, Chicago, and Houston on this slide. What I'm interested in, though, is the outliers. So who would have guessed that from all of my audience that the audience in Mesa, Arizona is the 6th largest revenue producer? And even more than that, that the e-commerce conversion rate from visitors from Mesa is 2.9%. So looking for those outliers can help you identify opportunity. How could I use this information? Well, maybe I know that there is a competitive environment in Mesa that means that I'm more likely to sell in e-commerce there. And so I actually want to do some paid advertising in Mesa to attract more customers. Maybe there's something about the product set that's a particular match to people in Mesa, and how could I create and modify my products or descriptions to make them equally appealing to other locations. The other interesting bit of location data you can get out of Google Analytics is if you have a location search on your website, you can actually capture the data that people are entering into that search query. So you can measure, not only identify where you have product in stores or where you have physical locations, you can also track where people are looking for you. And that might be interesting information that would lead you to identify some areas where you don't have good physical product coverage. So it would help your offline business as well as your e-commerce business. Another interesting question that you can answer inside of Google Analytics is, who is buying my product? So we run into lots of situations with customers where they've launched a product and they've invested a lot in the market research behind who's going to be the target audience for this client and who's going to be most interested in this product. And what's interesting is that the data doesn't always follow that pathway. So look at the audience information that Google Analytics is telling you to confirm who your target audience is, who is buying most of your products, or to shift that for you. In this particular example, we had a client who was targeting younger men, and we were able to show them that men in the 35 to 44 and even 45 to 54 age range were also purchasing at a significant rate. So was their marketing being inclusive enough for everybody that ended up being their target audience? The other reason this information is good to review at this point in time is that your audience may be shifting. So compare your audience over the past month, your audience of purchasers and site visitors versus a year ago or versus the beginning of the year, and you may see some interesting changes. Some of the statistics nationally show that men and women are changing their purchasing behavior at different rates. Men are adopting more e-commerce and curbside delivery, purchase online, and then pick up at the store behavior at a faster rate than women are, for example. And we are seeing other differences, which I'll talk about later, in who is buying product right now. Another question Google Analytics can answer is what's selling and what's not selling. So in the conversions report in e-commerce, you can take a look at the revenue generated, the purchases, and the quantity for each of your products. Within Google Analytics, you can go into a lot more depth here. So which products are purchased by which audiences? What are my biggest products for women between 25 and 40 versus women between 18 and 25? It can confirm or expand your idea of who your product is marketed to. And as you see those surprises in there, as you see that a product you didn't expect was performing well with older men, it can help you, again, think about how are you describing that product for that audience? Are you talking about the product benefits that that audience is likely to resonate with? Is that true now? Think back to the buying behaviors that are affecting COVID-related buying. Is there something in there that will help you think about the buyer journey here and which products they're picking that can help you highlight different products on the home page, things like that. So another question that Google Analytics is really good at helping is, what hurdles are my customers facing? There are a couple of reports that are in this really interesting flow format in the conversions area of the website. What this report does is highlight the key points in the shopping experience on your website, and it passes out how many people continue and how many people abandon by each stage in the process. So what we like to look at here is the anomalies. Where are the areas with the biggest drop-offs? Because if I can change that highlighted area, which says 74% of people are not proceeding to the cart, if I can increase that percentage by 1 or 2 or 10 or 20%, I can really increase the revenue on the website. So how can we bring more users in this example from the product page to the cart? If that's our biggest hurdle, could we think about calling out discounts in a different way? Could we bring the shipping calculator onto the product page? Could we test different product titles? Could we make sure that important content is above the fold? So a lot of different ways that we can think about adjusting the product page to try and encourage users to get it onto that next page. So use this report to identify where some of those hurdles are. There's a similar report which shows the process going through the purchase behavior specifically. So as you ask people to enter their shipping information and their payment information, it can help you find out where people are dropping off there, and which would cause you then to think through the process. How is it working on mobile? Is this information clear enough? Is it usable enough? Can I provide more information so that I can get users to that next step and increase the conversion rate on the website?
Yeah, that was great. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, over to you.
I was just thinking with e-commerce and marketing playbook, I love what you said, Chris, on the product description page and the data from analytics. It's so crucial on what we see successful for e-commerce. And sometimes it's the littlest thing, like making sure your button is not below the fold, that it's up above, where they can check out faster. So we're going to talk through our marketing playbook and specific things on e-commerce. So one of the big details that we discussed earlier is on email marketing, and a good example in the food space. This needs to be one of your biggest revenue drivers. So historically, for a lot of clients that we've had in the food space, 35% of their revenue is from email marketing, like from systems like Klaviyo. If you are not on a system that has smart automation sequences, I recommend looking into that. What I mean by smart automation sequences is that you have a flow of, for example, abandoned cart emails, welcome series flow, and you need to have them timed accordingly to how it will trigger somebody to make a decision. So in an abandoned cart flow, one thing that's really important is by having one trigger within the first 15 minutes of them jumping off of your site, and the next one being about 10 hours, and then a third being after, if they haven't opened those, of a couple days later. So food is an impulse buy. So this is really critical when it comes to re-engaging on email marketing. And most smart email marketing platforms like Klaviyo or others have an SMS or a text message component as well. So if you can capture the data on your customer, that you can engage with them through multiple platforms, we always recommend doing that. And making sure that you can shorten the time between the cart to touch base with them again to remind them. The latest psychology stats are that it takes people 3 reminders before pulling the trigger. And in an impulse buy like food, that's super important to kind of keep in mind when you're re-engaging your market and your traffic.
And just really quick, I wanted to chime in with some stats we're seeing in the field right now across a lot of our clients. We're seeing when email campaigns get sent out, usually the bulk of the revenue and the clicks and the opens happen within the first 2 hours, 3 hours. We're still seeing those trends, but we're also seeing revenue being tacked onto emails day 2, day 3 after the send, where we never really saw that before. And what we're seeing is that people are going back into their email and going into their promotions tab and looking through all of their emails in a way that we've never seen before. So it's critical to understand that you can see revenue attached to email campaigns day 2, day 3 inside of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point, because a lot of times people think email is dead or whatnot, or we all have too many emails sometimes and probably get annoyed with them. But in today's market, and when you're doing a couch marketing scenario of COVID, we're all at home, you really have to engage people in a creative mechanism that also allows them to shop with you. So sequencing becomes very important in your audience segments. So a good example, and I'm just going to say, like, since we have healthy food and natural products on here, if you were gluten-free and you had gluten-free tagged in your Shopify site, so you know that as a customer, that's what it is. And then in your email sequence, we can actually pull specific segments that are tagged gluten-free, or that were tagged as a dog owner, for example, or that were tagged as, you know, your VIP list because they've bought more than one time. So you can make specific email marketing to those people in a personalized way that has higher engagement and a higher click-through rate, as well as, of course, the overall conversions on your site accordingly.
So make sure you've got a really strong email program. Do be communicating with customers right now, because it is a really good revenue driver. So let's take a look at some other elements in the e-commerce marketing playbook. So remarketing is a really strong tactic we see any time of the year, but in particularly valuable now. So remarketing, just as a reminder, is advertising to users who have previously engaged with your website, social presence, or purchased on your website. It's a great time to re-engage with your customers. They do want to hear from you. And there are some creative things that we can do with remarketing lists that are particularly relevant right now. We can do dynamic product remarketing based on the products that users have actually browsed. It's an interesting idea to reach out to people who haven't purchased in a longer time frame than you usually might create a remarketing targeting list off of. So why not reach back out to consumers who haven't purchased in a year, and possibly offer them some sort of promotions, maybe a free product on a new product launch, or one of your higher margin products. So I think there's a lot of ways to get creative with the messaging behind remarketing right now that can re-engage some of your past brand promoters. One of the things that is fairly new on the scene is that Google is expanding the free product listings that it is offering and showing across their platforms. So the way that most of us experience shopping listings, product listings on Google, is through shopping ads at the top of a search results page. But Google offers product listings in other of their properties, including Google Discovery, the shopping tab on the search results page. And you can add product listings for free, and they will appear even if you're not an advertiser. So you can create a Google Sheet, upload it into Google Merchant Center, and get more visibility for those products that equates to that more traffic end of the spectrum. Another really good tactic is Google Shopping Ads. This is the channel by far that we see as with the strongest return on ad spend for new customer acquisition. So if you're looking to acquire new customers, this is the #1 tactic that we go to and start with. And loading in your products through Merchant Center is one part of that. If you're trying to grow even more, optimizing the product feed, so customizing the titles and descriptions that show out through this channel is really valuable, as is providing some back-end information about margin. So if you tag each of the products with high margin, low margin kinds of information, then your search advertising team can use that data to create a more sophisticated bidding model to drive not just more revenue through these sales, but also more profit through these sales. So it's a great opportunity to supercharge your ads campaign. It's a good time to be looking at organic social media. And of course, a table stakes here is to evaluate your current messaging, make sure it's aligning with what customers are going through right now. Think back to the types of buyers that there are during COVID times. Think back to the emotional connection you want to make with your buyer. One of the other things you can do from a growth perspective is to enable a product feed on Facebook, which allows you to set up dynamic remarketing ads. It allows you to tag products in your posts, and it also allows you to set up your Instagram to be shoppable. So just as we're looking at how to reduce the hurdles in purchase on our own website, we also want to look at how can you reduce the hurdles, get more specific product information out through the social channels as well. Another hint here, especially if you're doing advertising, is to evaluate if your audiences have changed. This is another area in social where we are seeing the audiences that engage with our brands is shifting right now in some unpredictable ways. One of our clients, for example, almost always a remarketing audience is one of your more profitable social media advertising audiences, because those are people who have already had some exposure to your brand. And as Rachel said, it can take 3 connections before people are motivated to reach out and do something. So that remarketing hits people on a second or third time. But we're actually seeing during this time that our prospecting audience is outperforming our remarketing audience, which is really unusual. So new consumers to this particular brand or new exposures to this brand are converting to purchases at a really high rate. So do take a look at those audiences and make some adjustments. And as those adjustments can be in your competitive targeting, it's a really good time to show the key differences between your brand and your competitors. Think back to that emotional connection. And do take a look at whether you're featuring your top performing products and work in new promotions for new customers. Okay, so let's take a look at another tactic that should be on your radar, and that is organic search or SEO. So when we look at SEO for an e-commerce site, we always start by looking at the product pages themselves. And if you are limited in resources, I would recommend that you start with the most important products first. And what you want to do here is make sure that you're optimizing the meta titles on the page, the meta descriptions. The meta descriptions should be enticing. That's actually what often shows on the search results page, and what would encourage somebody to click on your listing and come through to your website. So optimizing your descriptions, which can be a little tedious, I have to tell you, I've done it for my own website, is really valuable to getting a better click-through rate over to your website. Optimize the H1s on your page, the heading tags, and make sure that you've got detailed product page descriptions. That information is useful to consumers in different markets. Again, think about who your audience is, what their buying motivation is right now. See if you're answering those questions on the product page. And that can give you some ideas about how to expand that content. If you've got the basics of search engine optimization handled on your product pages, there are some more advanced opportunities. So you can add product page schema, which is a markup to the code that helps Google understand what the product data is that's on that page. You should definitely add product reviews. Consumers leverage those when making purchase decisions. You can A/B test meta tags and descriptions. You can do a competitive content review. So what product page, what information is featured on product pages of your competitors? And does that give you some ideas for information to add to yours? And then finally, take a look at your personas and think about how what their intent is when they're purchasing on your website and viewing your product details pages, and think about how content you've written there maps to serving those needs. What questions do they have as they're going in to purchase about ingredient lists, about special diets, and are you answering those questions on the details page? If not, it's a great time to add some more content for that. Beyond the product pages, take a look at your category pages. So adding more content, and again, thinking back to your user intent here, why are they there? What questions might they have is helpful. At the end of this paragraph, I've pointed to 2 resources, Google Trends and Answer the Public, which are really can be useful for helping you see what related content ideas there are to your category. So if your category is chia seeds, if you type in chia seeds into either one of those tools, you can get some related categories. You can get some questions consumers are asking related to chia seeds. You can add category page schema and optimize your URL structure to the category pages as well. All of those help improve how Google is reading your category pages, how useful those pages are to the consumers who are viewing them. And the last thing we wanted to mention in our marketing toolkit is conversion rate optimization. So if we think back to that equation, improving the conversion rate is going to increase the amount of revenue that we have if we can take more of those website visitors and convert them into buyers. So if you've identified that users are hitting roadblocks on your website through Google Analytics and comparing some of those metrics to industry benchmarks, how then can you know what to do about it? So we use tools like Lucky Orange. Lucky Orange has heat maps. It will do some visitor recordings so you can watch users going through your website. And it has some advanced checkout analytics that can help you pinpoint exactly where things might be going wrong. And then there are tools like Google Optimize and Optimizely that actually let you A/B test different solutions. So let's say that I have a hypothesis that putting my purchase button higher up on the page, on my product details page, is going to result in more adds to cart. I can use a tool like Google Optimize or Optimizely to A/B test that solution and make sure that that actually does increase my conversion rate before I make those changes across the whole site. So conversion rate optimization, you can find a lot of tweaks to your website that add up to an increase in revenue on your website. So we have hopefully given you a lot of different angles for ideas to generate. That's really one of our key hopes here, is that you have some new ideas about how consumers are showing up to your website, how you can analyze how they're using the website, how you can prepare your website and mix your products together to get greater average order value and ultimately just increase your revenue across the board. So I'll turn it back over to you, Maggie.
Perfect. And then the last slide here, just to give you guys a snapshot, Chris, Chelsea, and Rachel and their contact information, their LinkedIn, Twitter handles, definitely recommend following these ladies. Lots of good information on an ongoing basis. And yeah, I guess from here, we got a couple questions in chat, which we've resolved some of them, but I think this would be a nice segue into the office hours portion.